Hello, listeners, far and wide, near and far, wherever you are in space and time. And greetings again from the top of the hill in Martinez, California. Moved out on the porch where we have some sounds of birds. And I'm happy to say the wisteria is filled with bumblebees. And there's the sound of the wind through the wind chimes. So that will be hopefully the extent of the ambient noise you will hear as I read this, the 23rd installment and final chapters from Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice by James Branch Cabell. And this book, very famous in its time, was first published in 1919. And this is chapter 42, 12 that are fretted hourly. So it was upon Walburga's Eve, when almost anything is rather more than likely to happen. Then Jurgen went hastily out of heaven without having gained or wasted any love there. St. Peter unbarred for him not the main entrance, but a small private door carved with innumerable fishes in bas relief, because this exit opened directly upon any place you chose to imagine. For thus, St. Peter said, you may return without loss of time to your own illusions. There was a cross, said Jurgen, which I used to wear about my neck, through motives of sentiment, because it once belonged to my dead mother. For no woman has ever loved me save that Azra who was my mother. I wonder if your mother told you that, St. Peter asked him, smiling reminiscently. Mine did, time and again, and sometimes I have wondered. For as you may remember, I was a married man, Jurgen, and my wife did not quite understand me, said St. Peter with a sigh. Why, indeed, says Jurgen, my case is not entirely dissimilar, and the more I marry, the less I find of comprehension. I should have had more sympathy with King Smoit, who was certainly my grandfather. Well, you conceive, St. Peter, these other women have trusted me more or less because they loved a phantom Jurgen. But Azra trusted me not at all because she loved me with clear eyes. She comprehended Jurgen and yet loved him, though I, for one, with all my cleverness, cannot do either of these things. Nonetheless, in order to do the manly thing, in order to pleasure a woman, and a married woman too, I flung away the little gold cross, which was all that remained to me of my mother. And since then, St. Peter, the illusions of sentiment have given me a woefully wide berth, so I shall relinquish heaven to seek a cross. That has been done before, Jurgen, and I doubt it if much good came of it. Heyday, and did it not lead to the eternal glory of the first and greatest of the popes? It seems to me, sir, that you have either very little memory or very little gratitude, and I am tempted to crow in your face. Why, now you talk like a cherub, Jurgen, and you ought to have better manners. Do you suppose that we apostles enjoy hearing jokes made about the church? Well, it is true, St. Peter, that you founded the church. Now there you go again. That is what those patronizing seraphim and those impish cherubs are always telling us. You see, we 12 sit together in heaven, each on his white throne, and we behold everything that happens on earth. Now, from our station, there has been no ignoring the growth and doings of what you might loosely call Christianity. And sometimes that which we see makes us very uncomfortable, Jurgen, especially as just then some cherub is sure to flutter by in a broad grin and chuckle, but you started it. And we did. I cannot deny that in a way we did. Yet really we never anticipated anything of this sort, and it is not fair to tease us about it. Indeed, St. Peter. Now I think of it, you ought to be held responsible for very little that has been said or done in the shadow of a steeple. For as I remember it, you 12 attempted to convert a world to the teachings of Jesus, and good intentions ought to be respected, however drolly they may turn out. It was apparent this sympathy was grateful to the old saint, for he was moved to a more confidential tone. Meditatively, he stroked his long white beard, then said with indignation, "If only they would not claim Sib with us, we could stand it. But as it is, for centuries we have felt like fools. It is particularly embarrassing for me, of course, being on the wicket. For to cap it all, Jurgen, the little wretches die and come to heaven, impudent as sparrows, and expect me to let them in. From their thumb screwings and their auto-da-fés, and from their massacres and patriotic sermons and holy wars, and from every manner of abomination they come to me smirking. And millions upon millions of them, Jurgen. There is no form of cruelty or folly that has not come to me for praise, and no sort of criminal idiot who has not claimed fellowship with me, who was an apostle and a gentleman. Why, Jurgen, you may not believe it, but there was an eminent bishop came to me only last week in the expectation that I was going to admit him, and I, with the full record of his work for temperance, all fairly written out and in my hand." Now Jurgen was surprised. "But temperance is surely a virtue, St. Peter." "Ah, but his notion of temperance, and his filthy ravings to my face as though he were talking in some church or other. Why, the slavering little blasphemer. To my face he spoke against the first of my master's miracles, and against the last injunction which was laid upon us 12, spluttering that the wine was unfermented. To me he said this, look you, Jurgen, to me, who drank of that noble wine at Cana, and equally of that sustaining wine we had in the little upper room in Jerusalem, when the hour of trial was near and our master would have us at our best. With me, who have since tasted of that unimaginable wine which the master promised us in his kingdom, the busy wretch would be arguing and would have convinced me in the face of all my memories that my master, who was a man among men, was nourished by such thin swill as bread, this niggling, brawling wretch to plague me? Well, but indeed, St. Peter, there is no denying that wine is often misused. So he informed me, Jurgen, and I told him by that argument he would prohibit the making of bishops for reasons he would find in the mirror, and that, remembering what happened at the crucifixion, he would clap every lumber dealer into jail. So they took him away, still slavering, said St. Peter warily. He was threatening to have somebody else elected in my place when I last heard him, but that was only old habit. I do not think, however, that I encountered any such bishop, sir, down yonder, in the hell of your fathers. Oh, no, your fathers meant well, but their notions were limited. No, we have quite another eternal home for these blasphemers, in a region that was fitted out long ago when the need grew pressing to provide a place for zealous churchmen. And who devised this place, St. Peter? As a very special favor, we 12, to whom is imputed the beginning and the patronizing of such abominations, were permitted to design and furnish this place. And of course we put it in charge of our former confrere, Judas. He seemed the appropriate person. Equally, of course, we put a very special roof upon it, the best imitation which we could contrive of the war roof, so that none of these grinning cherubs could see what long reward it was we 12 who founded Christianity have contrived for these blasphemers. Well, doubtless that was wise. Ah, and if we 12 had our way, there would be just such another roof kept always over earth. For the slavering madman has left a many like him, clamoring and spewing about the churches that were named for us 12, and in the pulpits of the churches that were named for us, and we find it embarrassing. It is the doctrine of Mahon, they splutter, and not any doctrine that we ever preached or even heard of. And they ought to say so fairly instead of libeling us, who were apostles and gentlemen. But thus it is that the rascals make free with our names, and the cherubs keep track of these antics and poke fun at us, so that it is not all pleasure, this being a holy apostle in heaven, Jurgen, though once we 12 were happy enough. And St. Peter sighed. One thing I did not understand, sir, and that was when you spoke just now of the war roof. It is a stone roof, made of the 2 tablets handed down at Sinai, which God fits over earth whenever men go to war, for he is merciful. And many of us here remember that once upon a time we were men and women, so when men go to war, God screens the sight of what they do because he wishes to be merciful to us. That must prevent, however, the assent of all prayers that are made in wartime. Why, but of course, that is the roof's secondary purpose, replied St. Peter. What else would you expect when the master's teachings are being flouted? Rumors get through, though somehow, and horribly preposterous rumors. For instance, I have actually heard that in wartime prayers are put up to the Lord God to back his favorites and take part in the murdering. No, said the good saint in haste. That I would believe even a Christian bishop to be capable of such blasphemy. I merely want to show you, Jurgen, what wild stories get about. Still, I remember back in Cappadocia. And then St. Peter slapped his thigh. But would you keep me gossiping here forever, Jurgen, with the souls lining up at the main entrance? Like ants that swarm to molasses? Come out of heaven with you, Jurgen, and back to whatever place you imagine will restore to you your own proper illusions, and let me be returning to my duties. Well then, St. Peter, I imagine Amnaran Heath, where I flung away my mother's last gift to me. And Amnaran Heath it is, said St. Peter, as he thrust Jurgen through the small private door that was carved with fishes in bas relief. And Jurgen saw that the saint spoke truthfully. Chapter 43. Pictures before a shadow. Thus Jurgen stood again upon Amnaran Heath, and again it was Walburgis Eve, when almost anything is rather more than likely to happen, and the low moon was bright, so that the shadow of Jurgen was long and thin, and Jurgen searched for the gold cross that he had worn through motives of sentiment, but he could not find it, nor did he ever recover it. But barberry bushes and the thorns of barberry bushes he found in great plenty as he searched vainly. All the while that he searched, the shirt of Nessus glittered in the moonlight, and the shadow of Jurgen streamed long and thin, and every movement that was made by Jurgen the shadow parodied, and as always it was the shadow of a lean woman with her head wrapped in a towel. Now Jurgen regarded this shadow, and to Jurgen it was abhorrent. "Oh, Mother Sereta," says he, "for a whole year your shadow has dogged me. Many lands we have visited and many sights we have seen, and at the end all that we have done is a tale that is told, and it is a tale that does not matter. So I stand where I stood at the beginning of my foiled journeying. The gift you gave me has availed me nothing, and I do not care whether I be young or old. I have lost all that remained to me of my mother and of my mother's love, and I have betrayed my mother's pride in me, and I am weary. Now a little whispering gathered upon the ground, as though dead leaves were moving there, and the whispering augmented because this was upon Walpurgis Eve, when almost anything is rather more than likely to happen, and the whispering became the ghost of a voice. You flatter me very cunningly, Jurgen, for you are a monstrous clever fellow. This it was that the voice said dryly. A number of people might say that with tolerable justice, Jurgen declared. And yet I guess who speaks. As for flattering you, godmother, I was only joking that day in Glathion. In fact, I was careful to explain as much the moment I noticed your shadow seemed interested in my idle remarks and was writing them all down in a notebook. Oh no, I can assure you I trafficked quite honestly and have dealt fairly everywhere. For the rest, I really am very clever. It would be foolish of me to deny it. Vain fool, said the voice of Mother Soretta. Jurgen replied, It may be that I am vain, but it is certain that I am clever, and even more certain is the fact that I am weary. For look you, in the tinsel of my borrowed youth, I have gone romancing through the world, and into lands unvisited by other men have I ventured, playing at spillikins with women and gear and with the welfare of kingdoms, and into hell have I fallen, and into heaven have I climbed, and into the place of the Lord God himself have I crept stealthily, and nowhere have I found what I desired. Nor do I know what my desire is, even now. But I know that it is not possible for me to become young again, whatever I may appear to others. Indeed, Jurgen, youth has passed out of your heart, beyond the reach of Leshy, and the nearest you can come to regaining youth is to behave childishly. Oh, godmother, but do give rein to your better instincts and all that sort of thing, and speak with me more candidly. Come now, dear lady, there should be no secrets between you and me. In Lucca, you were reported to be Cabell, the great res dia, the mistress of every tangible thing. In Compiègne, they spoke of you as Esred, and Camillard Merlin called you Adere, dark mother of the little gods. Well, but at your home in the forest, where I first had the honor of making your acquaintance, godmother, you told me you were Soretta, who takes the color out of things and controls all Wednesdays. Now these anagrams bewilder me, and I desire to know you frankly for what you are. It may be that I am all these. Meanwhile, I bleach, and sooner or later I bleach everything. It may be that someday, Jurgen, I shall even take the color out of a fool's conception of himself. Yes, but just between ourselves, godmother, is it not the shadow of you that prevents my entering quiet into the appropriate emotion, the spirit of the occasion, as one might say, and robs my life of the zest which other persons apparently get out of living? Come now, you know it is. Well, and for my part, godmother, I love it just as well as any man breathing, but I do prefer to have it intelligible. Now let me tell you something plainly, Jurgen. Mother Soretta cleared her invisible throat and began to speak rather indignantly. Well, godmother, if you will pardon my frankness, I do not think it is quite nice to talk about such things, and certainly not with so much candor. However, dismissing these considerations of delicacy, let us revert to my original question. You have given me youth and all the appearances of youth, and therewith you have given too in your joking way, which nobody appreciates more heartily than I. A shadow that renders all things not quite satisfactory, not wholly to be trusted, not to be met with frankness. Now, as you understand, I hope I concede the jest. I do not for a moment deny it is a master stroke of humor. But after all, just what exactly is the point of it? What does it mean? It may be that there is no meaning anywhere. Could you face that interpretation, Jurgen? No, said Jurgen. I have faced God and devil, but that I will not face. No more would I, who have so many names, face that. You jested with me, so I jest with you. Probably Cochet jests with all of us. And he, no doubt, even Cochet, who made things as they are, is in turn the butt of some larger jest. He may be, certainly, said Jurgen. Yet on the other hand, about these matters I do not know. How should I? But I think that all of us take part in a moving and a shifting and a reasoned using of the things which are Cochet's, a using such as we do not comprehend and are not fit to comprehend. That is possible, said Jurgen, but nonetheless, it is as a chessboard whereon the pieces move diversely, the knights leaping sideways, and the bishops darting obliquely, and the rooks charging straight forward, and the pawns laboriously hobbling from square to square, each at the player's will. There is no discernible order at all. To the onlooker is manifestly in confusion, but to the player there is a meaning in the disposition of the pieces. I do not deny it. Still, one must grant, and I think it is as though each of the pieces, even the pawns, had a chessboard of his own, which moves as he is moved, and whereupon he moves the pieces to suit his will, in the very moment wherein he is moved, willy-nilly. You may be right, yet even so, and Cochet, who directs this infinite moving of puppets, may well be the futile harried king in some yet larger game. Now, certainly I cannot contradict you, but at the same time, so goes this crisscross, multitudinous moving as far as thought can reach, and beyond that the moving goes. All moves up uncomprehendingly, and to the sound of laughter, for all moves in consequence with a higher power that understands the meaning of the movement, and each moves the pieces before him in consonance with his ability. So the game is endless and ruthless, and there is merriment overhead, but it is very far away. Nobody is more willing to concede that these are handsome fancies, Mother Sereda, but they make my head ache. Moreover, 2 people are needed to play chess, and your hypothesis does not provide anybody with an antagonist. Lastly, and above all, how do I know there is a word of truth in your high-sounding fancies? How can any of us know anything? And what is Jurgen that his knowing or his not knowing should matter to anybody? Jurgen slapped his hands together. Ha, Mother Sereda, says he, but now I have you. It is that, precisely, that damnable question, which your shadow has been whispering to me from the beginning of our companionship. And I am through with you. I will have no more of your gifts, which are purchased at the cost of hearing that whisper. I am resolved henceforward to be as other persons, and to believe implicitly in my own importance. But have you any reason to blame me? I restored to you your youth, and when, just as the passing of the Cleveland Wednesday, which I loaned, you rebuked the Countess Dorothy very edifyingly, I was pleased to find a man so chaste, and therefore I continued my grant of youth. Ah, yes, said Jurgen. Then that was the way of it. You were pleased just in the nick of time by my virtuous rebuke of the woman who tempted me. Yes, to be sure. Well, well, come now, you know this is very gratifying. Nonetheless, your chastity, however unusual, has proved a barren virtue. For what have you made of a year of youth? Why, each thing that every man of 40-odd by ordinary regrets having done, you have done again, only more swiftly, compressing the follies of a quarter of a century into the space of 1 year. You have sought bodily pleasures. You have made jests. You have asked many idle questions. And you have doubted all things, including Jurgen. In the face of your memories, in the face of what you probably considered cordial repentance, you have made of your second youth just nothing. Each thing that every man of 40-odd regrets having done, you have done again. Yes, it is undeniable that I remarried, said Jurgen. Indeed, now I think of it, there was Anytus and Chloris and Florimel, so that I have married thrice in 1 year. But I am largely the victim of heredity. You must remember, since it was without consulting me that Smoit of Glathion perpetuated his characteristics. Your marriages I do not criticize, for each was in accordance with the custom of the country. The law is always respectable, and matrimony is an honorable estate, and has a steadying influence in all climes. It is true my shadow reports several other affairs. Oh, godmother, and what is this you are telling me? There was a Yolande and a Guinevere. The voice of Mother Sereda appeared to read from a memorandum. And a Sylvia, who was your own step-grandmother, and a Stella, who was a Yogini, whatever that may be, and a Phyllis and a Dolores, who were the queens of Hell and Philistia severally. Moreover, you visited the queen of Pseudopolis in circumstances which could not but have been unfavorably viewed by her husband. Oh yes, you have committed follies with diverse women. Follies it may be, but no crimes, not even a misdemeanor. Look you, Mother Sereda, does your shadow report in all this year one single instance of misconduct with a woman? Says Jurgen sternly. No, dearie, as I joyfully concede. The very worst reported is that matters were sometimes assuming a more or less suspicious turn when you happened to put out the light. And of course, shadows cannot exist in absolute darkness. See now, said Jurgen, what a thing it is to be careful. Careful, I mean, in one's avoidance of even an appearance of evil. In what other young men of 21 may you look to find such a countenance? And yet you grumble. I do not complain because you have lived chastely. That pleases me, and is the single reason you have been spared this long. Oh, godmother, and whatever are you telling me? Yes, dearie, had you once sinned with a woman in the youth I gave you, would have been punished instantly and very terribly. For I was always a great believer in chastity. And in the old days I used to ensure the chastity of all my priests in the only way that is infallible. In fact, I noticed something of the sort as you passed in Luque. And over again I have been angered by my shadow's reports, and was about to punish you, my poor dearie, when I would remember that you held fast to the rarest of all virtues in a man, and that my shadow reported no irregularities with women. And that would please me, I acknowledge, so I would let matters run on a while longer. But it is a shiftless business, dearie, for you are making nothing of the youth I restored to you. And have you 1,000 lives, the result would be the same. Nevertheless, I am a monstrous clever fellow, Jurgen chuckled here. You are indeed a palterer, and your life, apart from that fine song you made about me, is sheer waste. Ah, if you come to that, There was a brown man in the Druid forest who showed me a very curious spectacle in last June, and I am not apt to lose the memory of what he showed me, whatever you may say, and whatever I may have said to him. This and a many other curious spectacles you have seen and may have made nothing of, in the false youth I gave you, and therefore my shadow was angry that in the revelation of so much futile trifling I did not take away the youth I gave, as I have half a mind to do. Even now I warn you, dearie, for there is really no putting up with you. But I spared you because of my shadow's grudging reports as to your continence, which is a virtue that we of the Leshy peculiarly revere. Now Jurgen considered. Then it is within your ability to make me old again, or rather an excellently preserved person of 40-odd, or say 39 by the calendar, but not looking it by a long shot? Such threats are easily voiced, but how can I know that you are speaking the truth? How can any of us know anything? And what is Jurgen that his knowing or his not knowing should matter to anybody? There's some more ambient noise. Ah, godmother, and must you still be mumbling that? Come now, forget you are a woman, and be reasonable. You exercise the fair and ancient privilege of kinship by calling me harsh names, but it is in the face of this plain fact. I got from you what never man has got before. I am a monstrous clever fellow, say what you will, for already I have cajoled you out of a year of youth, a year wherein I have neither builded nor robbed any churches, but have had upon the whole a very pleasant time. And you may murmur platitudes and threats and axioms and anything else which happens to appeal to you. The fact remains that I got what I wanted. Yes, I cajoled you very neatly into giving me eternal youth, for of course, poor dear, you are now powerless to take it back, and so I shall retain, in spite of you, the most desirable possession in life. I gave in honor of your chastity, which is the one commendable trait that you possess. My chastity, I grant you, is remarkable. Nevertheless, you really gave because I was the cleverer. And what I give I can retract at will. Come, you know very well you can do nothing of the sort. I refer you to Savius Nicanor. None of the Leshy can ever take back the priceless gift of youth. That is explicitly proved in the appendix. Now, but I am becoming angry. To the contrary, as I perceive with real regret, you are becoming ridiculous, since you dispute the authority of Savius Nicanor. And I will show you, I will show you, you jacksnaps, jackanapes. But come now, keep your temper in hand. All fairly erudite persons know you cannot do the thing you threaten, and it is notorious that the weakest wheel of every cart creaks loudest. So do you cultivate a judicious taciturnity, for really nobody is going to put up with petulance in an ugly and toothless woman of your age, as I tell you, for your own good. It always vexes people to be told anything for their own good. So what followed happened quickly. A fleece of clouds slipped over the moon. The night seemed bitterly cold for the space of a heartbeat. And then matters were comfortable enough. The moon emerged in its full glory, and there in front of Jurgen was the proper shadow of Jurgen. He dazedly regarded his hands, and they were the hands of an elderly person. He felt the calves of his legs, and they were shrunken. He patted himself sensually, and underneath the shirt of Nessus, the paunch of Jurgen was of impressive dimension. In other respects, he had abated. Then, too, I have forgotten something very suddenly, reflected Jurgen. It was something I wanted to forget. Ah, yes, but what was it that I wanted to forget? Why, there was a brown man, with something unusual about his feet. He talked nonsense and behaved idiotically in the Druid forest. He was probably insane. No, I do not remember what it was that I have forgotten, but I am sure it was gnawed away in the back of my mind. It has gnawed away in the back of my mind like a small, ruinous maggot, and then, after all, it was of no importance. Aloud he wailed in his most moving tones, "Oh, Mother Sarita, I did not mean to anger you. It was not fair to snap me up on a thoughtless word. Have mercy upon me, Mother Sarita, for I would never have alluded to your being so old and plain-looking if I had known you were so vain." But Mother Sarita did not appear to be softened by this form of entreaty, for nothing happened. "Well, then, thank goodness that is over," says Jurgen to himself. "Of course she may be listening still, and it is dangerous jesting with the Leshy. But really they do not seem to be very intelligent. Otherwise this irritable maunderer would have known that. Everything else apart, I am heartily tired of the responsibilities of youth under any such constant surveillance. Now all is changed. There is no call to avoid a suspicion of wrongdoing by transacting all philosophical investigations in the dark, and I am no longer distrustful of lamps or candles, or even of sunlight. Old body, you are as grateful as old slippers to a somewhat wearied man, and for the second time I have tricked Mother Sarita rather neatly. My knowledge of Lisa, however painfully acquired, is a decided advantage in dealing with anything that is feminine." Then Jurgen regarded the black cave. "And that reminds me, it still would be, I suppose, the manly thing to continue my quest for Lisa. The intimidating part is that if I go into this cave for the third time, I shall almost certainly get her back. By every rule of tradition, the third attempt is invariably successful. I wonder if I want Lisa back." Jurgen meditated, and he shook his grizzled head. "I do not definitely know. She was an excellent cook. There were pies that I shall always remember with affection. And she meant well, poor dear. But then, if it was really her head that I sliced off last May, or if her temper is not any better, still it is an interminable nuisance washing your own dishes, and I appear to have no aptitude whatever for sewing and darning things. But to the other hand, Lisa nags so, and she does not understand me." Jurgen shrugged. "Seesaw. The argument for and against might run on indefinitely. Since I have no real preference, I will humor prejudice by doing the manly thing, for it seems only fair. And besides, it may fail after all." Then he went into the cave for the third time. Chapter 44. In the manager's office. The tale tells that all was dark there, and Jurgen could see no one. But the cave stretched straight forward and downward, and at the far end was a glow of light. Jurgen went on, and so came to the place where Nessid had lain in wait for Jurgen. Again Jurgen stooped and crawled through the opening in the cave's wall, and so came to where lamps were burning upon tall iron stands. Now one by one these lamps were going out, and there were now no women there. Instead, Jurgen trod inch-deep in fine white ashes, leaving the print of his feet upon them. He went forward as the cave stretched. He came to a sharp turn in the cave, with the failing lamplight now behind him, so that his shadow confronted Jurgen, blurred but unarguable. It was the proper shadow of a commonplace and elderly pawnbroker, and Jurgen regarded it with approval. Jurgen came then into a sort of underground chamber from the roof of which was suspended a kettle of quivering red flames. Facing him was a throne, and back of this were rows of benches, but here too was nobody. Resting upright against the vacant throne was a triangular white shield, and when Jurgen looked more closely he could see there was writing upon it. Jurgen carried this shield as close as he could to the kettle of flames, for his eyesight was now not very good, and besides the flames in the kettle were burning low, and Jurgen deciphered the message that was written upon the shield in black and red letters. "Absent upon important affairs," it said. "Will be back in an hour." And it was signed Thragnar R. "I wonder now for whom King Thragnar left this notice," reflected Jurgen. "Certainly not for me, and I wonder too if he left it here a year ago or only this evening. And I wonder if it was Thragnar's head I removed in the black and silver pavilion. Ah, well, there are a number of things to wonder about in this incredible cave, wherein the lights are dying out, as I observe with some discomfort, and I think the air grows chiller." And Jurgen looked to his right at the stairway which he and Guinevere had ascended, and he shook his head. "Glathion is no fit resort for a respectable pawnbroker. Chivalry is for young people, like the late Duke of Logrius. But I must get out of this place, for certainly there is in the air a death-like chill." So Jurgen went on down the aisle between the rows of benches, wherefrom Thragnar's warriors had glared at Jurgen when he was last in this part of the cave. At the end of the aisle was a wooden door painted white. It was marked in large black letters, "Office of the Manager. Keep out." So Jurgen opened this door. He entered into a notable place illuminated by 7 crescent lights. These lights were the power of Assyria and Nineveh and Egypt and Rome and Athens and Byzantium. 6 other crescents stood ready there, but fire had not yet been laid to these. Back of all was a large blackboard with much figuring on it in red chalk. And here too was the black gentleman who a year ago had given his blessing to Jurgen for speaking civilly of the powers of darkness. Tonight the black gentleman wore a black dressing gown that was embroidered with all the signs of the zodiac. He sat at a table, the top of which was curiously inlaid with 30 pieces of silver. And he was copying entries from one big book into another. He looked up from his writing pleasantly enough, and very much as though he was expecting Jurgen. "You find me busy with the stellar accounts," says he, "which appears to be in a fearful muddle. But what more can I do for you, Jurgen? For you, my friend, who spoke a kind word for things as they are, and furnished me with 1 or 2 really very acceptable explanations as to why I have created evil. I have been thinking, Prince," begins the pawnbroker. "And why do you call me a prince, Jurgen?" "I do not know, sir, but I suspect that my quest is ended and that you are Koschei the Deathless." The black gentleman nodded. "Something of the sort. Koschei or Ardnari or Petha or Jadaloth or Abraxas. It is all one what I may be called hereabouts. My real name you never heard. No man has ever heard my name. So the matter we need hardly go into." "Precisely, Prince. But it is a long way that I have traveled round about to win to you who make things as they are, and it is eager I am to learn just why you made things as they are." Up went the black gentleman's eyebrows into regular Gothic arches. "And do you really think, Jurgen, that I am going to explain to you why I made things as they are?" "I fail to see, Prince, how my wanderings could have any other equitable climax." "But, friend, I have nothing to do with justice. To the contrary, I am Cochet, who made things as they are. Jurgen saw the point. Your reasoning, Prince, is unanswerable. I bow to it. I should even have foreseen it. Do you tell me, then, what thing is this which I desire and cannot find in any realm that man has known, nor in any kingdom that man has imagined? Cochet was very patient. I am not, I confess, anything like as well acquainted with what has been going on in this part of the universe as I ought to be. Of course, events are reported to me in a general sort of way, and some of my people were put in charge of these stars a while back, but they appear to have run the constellation rather shiftlessly. Still, I have recently been figuring on the matter, and I do not despair of putting the suns hereabouts to some profitable use, in one way or another, after all. Of course, it is not as if it were an important constellation, but I am an economist, and I dislike waste. Then he was silent for an instant, not greatly worried by the problem, as Jurgen could see, but mildly vexed by his inability to divine the solution out of hand. Present, Cochet said. And in the meantime, Jurgen, I am afraid I cannot answer your question on the spur of the moment. You see, there appears to have been a great number of human beings, as you call them, evolved upon, oh yes, upon Earth. I have the approximate figures over yonder, but they would hardly interest you, and the desires of each one of these human beings seems to have been multitudinous and inconstant. Yet, Jurgen, you might appeal to the local authorities, for I remember appointing some at the request of a very charming old lady. In fine, you do not know what thing it is that I desire, said Jurgen, much surprised. Why, no, I have not the least notion, replied Cochet. Still, I suspect that if you got it, you would protest. Still, I suspect that if you got it, you would protest it was a most unjust affliction. So why keep worrying about it? Jurgen demanded almost indignantly, but have you not then, Prince, been guiding all my journeying during this last year? Now really, Jurgen, I remember our little meeting very pleasantly, and I endeavored forthwith to dispose of your most urgent annoyance. But I confess I have had one or two other matters upon my mind since then. You see, Jurgen, the universe is rather large, and the running of it is a considerable tax upon my time. I cannot manage to see anything like as much of my friends as I would be delighted to see of them. And so perhaps, what with one thing and another, I have not given you my undivided attention all through the year. Not every moment of it, that is. Ah, Prince, I see that you are trying to spare my feelings, and it is kind of you. But the upshot is that you do not know what I have been doing, and you did not care what I was doing. Dear me, but this is a very sad come-down for my pride. Yes, but reflect how remarkable a possession is that pride of yours, and how I wonder at it, and how I envy it in vain, I who have nothing anywhere to contemplate save my own handiwork. Do you consider, Jurgen, what I would give if I could find anywhere in this universe of mine anything which would make me think myself one half so important as you think Jurgen is? And Cochet sighed. But instead, Jurgen considered the humiliating fact that Cochet had not been supervising Jurgen's travels. And of a sudden, Jurgen perceived that this Cochet, the Deathless, was not particularly intelligent. Then Jurgen wondered why he should ever have expected Cochet to be intelligent. Cochet was omnipotent, as men estimate omnipotence. But by what course of reasoning had people come to believe that Cochet was clever, as men estimate cleverness? The fact that, to the contrary, Cochet seemed well-meaning but rather slow of apprehension, and a little needlessly fussy, went far toward explaining a host of matters which had long puzzled Jurgen. Cleverness was, of course, the most admirable of all traits, but cleverness was not at the top of things, and never had been. "Very well, then," says Jurgen with a shrug. "Let us come to my third request, and to the third thing that I have been seeking. Here, though, you ought to be more communicative. For I have been thinking, Prince, my wife's society is perhaps becoming to you a trifle burdensome." Sirs, I am not unaccustomed to women. I may truthfully say that as I find them, so do I take them, and I was willing to oblige a fellow rebel. But I do not know, Prince, that I have ever rebelled. Far from it, I have everywhere conformed with custom. Your lips conformed, but all the while your mind made verses, Jurgen, and poetry is man's rebellion against being what he is. And besides, you call me a fellow rebel. Now how can it be possible that Cochet, who made all things as they are, should be a rebel? Unless indeed there is some power above even Cochet. I would very much like to have that explained to me, sir. No doubt. But then why should I explain it to you, Jurgen? Says the black gentleman. Well, be that as it may, Prince. But to return a little, I do not know that you have obliged me to carrying off my wife. Have obliged me in carrying off my wife. I mean, of course, my first wife. Why, Jurgen, says the black gentleman in high astonishment, do you mean to tell me that you want the plague of your life back again? I do not know about that either, sir. She was certainly very hard to live with. On the other hand, I had become used to having her about. I rather miss her now that I am again an elderly person. Indeed, I believe I have missed Lisa all along. The black gentleman meditated. Come, friend, he says at last. You are a poet of some merit. You displayed a promising talent which might have been cleverly developed in any suitable environment. Now I repeat, I am an economist. I dislike waste. And you were never fitted to be anything save a poet. The trouble was, and Cochet lowered his voice to an impressive whisper, the trouble was your wife did not understand you. She hindered your art. Yes, that precisely sums it up. She interfered with your soul development and your instinctive need of self-expression and all that sort of thing. You are very well rid of this woman who converted a poet into a pawnbroker. To the other side, as it is with point observed somewhere or other, it is not good for a man to live alone. But, friend, I have just the wife for you. Well, Prince, said Jurgen, I am willing to taste any drink once. So Cochet waved his hand, and there, quick as winking, was the loveliest lady that Jurgen had ever imagined. Chapter 45. The Faith of Guinevere. Very fair was this woman to look upon, with her shining gray eyes and small smiling lips. A fairer woman might no man boast of having seen, and she regarded Jurgen graciously, with her cheeks red and white, very lovely to observe. She was clothed in a robe of flame-colored silk, and about her neck was a collar of red gold, and she told him, quite as though she spoke with a stranger, that she was Queen Guinevere. But Lancelot is turned monk at Glastonbury, and Arthur is gone into Avalon, says she, and I will be your wife if you will have me, Jurgen. And Jurgen saw that Guinevere did not know him at all, and that even his name to her was meaningless. There were many ways of accounting for this, but he put aside the unflattering explanation that she had simply forgotten all about Jurgen in favor of the reflection that the Jurgen she had known was a scapegrace of 21. whereas he was now a staid and knowledgeable pawnbroker. And it seemed to Jurgen that he had never really loved any woman save Guinevere, the daughter of Gorgrangoire, and the pawnbroker was troubled. "For again you make me think myself a god," says Jurgen. "Madame Guinevere, when man recognized himself to be heaven's vicar upon earth, it was to serve and to glorify and to protect you and your radiant sisterhood that man consecrated his existence. You were beautiful, and you were frail, and you were half goddess and half bric-a-brac. Ohime, I recognize the call of chivalry, and my heartstrings resound, yet for innumerable reasons I hesitate to take you for my wife, and to concede myself your appointed protector, responsible as such to heaven. For one matter, I am not altogether sure that I am heaven's vicar here upon earth. Certainly the God of heaven said nothing to me about it, and I cannot but suspect that omniscience would have selected some more competent representative." "It is so written, Monsieur Jurgen." Jurgen shrugged. "I, too, in the intervals of business, have written much that is beautiful. Very often my verses were so beautiful that I would have given anything in the world in exchange for somewhat less sure information as to the author's veracity. Ah, no, madam. Desire and knowledge are pressing me so sorely that between them I dare not love you, and still I cannot help it." Then Jurgen gave a little ringing gesture with his hands. His smile was not merry, and it seemed pitiful that Guinevere should not remember him. "Madam and Queen," says Jurgen, "once long and long ago there was a man who worshipped all women. To him they were one and all of sacred, sweet, intimidating beauty. He shaped sonorous rhymes of this in praise of the mystery and sanctity of women. Then a count's tow-headed daughter whom he loved with such love as it puzzles me to think of now was shown to him just as she was, and not even worthy of hatred. The goddess stood revealed, unveiled, and displaying in all things such mediocrity as he fretted to find in himself. That was unfortunate, for he began to suspect that women also are akin to their parents, and are no wiser, and no more subtle, and no more immaculate than the Father who begot them. Madam and Queen, it is not good for any man to suspect this." "It is certainly not the conduct of a chivalrous person, nor of an authentic poet," says Queen Guinevere, "and yet your eyes are big with tears." "Ha, madam," he replied, "but it amuses me to weep for a dead man with eyes that once were his. For he was a dear lad before he went rampaging through the world in the pride of his youth and in the armor of his hurt, and songs he made for the pleasure of kings, and sword play he made for the pleasure of men, and a whispering he made for the pleasure of women, in places where renown was, and where he tried I will have to return to this for the very last conclusion. Sorry for the interruption.